While the world sleeps, a little girl hears footsteps under her kitchen floor, slow, deliberate, like someone counting the years. What she doesn't know is that beneath her family's mansion, hidden in a sealed Cold War bunker, lives a man the world gave up on decades ago. He's not a stranger. He's her grandfather, a soldier declared dead in Vietnam, and father to a billionaire who built his empire by burying the past. Why did he never come home? What kept him alive all these years? And what happens when the truth comes back? Not as a memory, but as a man. Before we begin, tell us, if someone you lost came back tomorrow, what would you say first? Lucy Hart heard it again. 3 steps, a pause, then 2 more. Every morning for the past week, just before the sun broke over the ridge, she'd sit cross-legged on the kitchen tiles and wait. Her nanny said old houses creaked when they settled, and the chef had joked that maybe it was the pipes stretching their legs. But Lucy wasn't stupid. These steps weren't random, weren't ghost stories or plumbing noises. They were steady and deliberate, as if someone careful was pacing beneath her. That morning she stayed longer than usual, fingers tapping against her knees in time with the quiet rhythm below. When the steps stopped altogether, she stood and padded barefoot toward Marta, the housekeeper, who had just started the kettle. "He's back," Lucy said, completely certain. Marta turned with one of her habitual soft laughs, brushing a flour-dusted hand on her apron. "Sweetheart, who's back?" Lucy pointed to the photo framed on the hallway wall, the one of the young man in army green, smiling like he knew something no one else did. "That one," she said firmly. "The grandpa in the picture. He's under our house." Marta blinked, unsure how to respond to the conviction in the girl's voice, but something about the way Lucy said it made her spine prickle. She reached for her phone without another word. By the time Michael Hart entered the kitchen, groggy from a 4 a.m. call with Tokyo investors, the house was awake in a way he didn't like. 2 members of the private security team were already lifting a panel off the floor in the west hallway. He barely managed a sip of black coffee before asking, "What the hell is going on?" Marta met his eyes evenly. "There's someone in the old bunker, Mr. Hart." Michael frowned. "That's sealed off." "Apparently not," one of the guards replied, his voice muffled under the floor. Lucy stood behind her father, arms folded over her pajamas, watching. "I told them he was back," she said, almost proudly. Michael crouched beside her, placing a firm hand on her shoulder. "Sweetheart, there's no one down there. Sometimes our minds—" But he stopped, because at that moment the silence shifted. A scraping noise echoed up from below, followed by a dull clang. Then something that unmistakably sounded like coughing. The guard reappeared in the hatchway, pale. "Sir, you'll want to come down here." Michael hesitated, every inch of him bristling, but Lucy stepped forward, slipping her hand into his. "Please, Daddy," she whispered. "He's cold down there." The stairs into the bunker groaned as Michael descended, Lucy's hand still gripping his, though tighter now. The security lights blinked once, then stabilized, casting pale beams against the concrete walls. The air smelled like rust and brine. At the far end of the bunker, behind an old backup generator, someone was curled into himself, like a forgotten bag of bones. A ragged military jacket clung to his frame. He was clutching a metal dog tag in one hand and holding it close to his chest like it was the only thing keeping him tethered. The man was mumbling, voice hoarse and cracked. "Hart! Arthur L. Hart, O positive, Bravo Company!" Lucy dropped Michael's hand and took one quiet step closer. Michael didn't breathe. Not because he feared the man, but because he recognized the name and had spent his entire life trying to forget the face. The man on the ground looked up slowly, his eyes squinting against the artificial light, pupils dancing as if still searching for a treetop canopy or a chopper overhead. He blinked and whispered again, clearer this time. "Hart, Arthur, Sergeant, O positive." It was like watching a ghost read his own gravestone aloud. One of the guards moved to intervene, but Michael raised a hand to stop him. The man, no, the thing, the echo of a man. sat up straighter now, revealing a gaunt, weather-worn face. His hair, once thick and dark in the black and white photo Michael knew too well, was now matted grey. His beard was uneven, streaked with sea salt and grime, but the eyes, God, the eyes. Michael had inherited that exact shade, a storm-colored blue. The man kept repeating his own name like a soldier giving a report, until his voice broke, and he fell silent, breathing hard through cracked lips. "Dad?" Michael asked, unsure whether it was a question or a test. The man didn't respond. He simply reached out his hand, trembling, palm open, empty. Lucy stepped around her father before anyone could stop her and kneeled in front of the man. She studied him for a long moment, then carefully took off the small fleece blanket she'd wrapped around her shoulders earlier that morning. She placed it over his back and tugged it snug under his chin. "You're cold," she said simply. "Here, I can share." The man flinched at first, then nodded so slightly it could have been mistaken for the wind shifting. Michael stared at his daughter, too stunned to move. "Lucy, you shouldn't—" he started, but stopped again. Something about the image in front of him undid the carefully ordered hierarchy of his world. His daughter's small hand on the shoulder of the man who should have been dead for 54 years. The man who had abandoned a young wife and left a 6-year-old boy with only folded flags and ceremonial medals to grow up with. Michael had told himself stories, ones with clean endings, where dead men stayed dead and the living didn't have to forgive anyone. But the man wasn't dead. He was right there, shaking and broken, but alive. And Lucy wasn't afraid of him. She was doing the one thing Michael had never learned how to do, offer warmth without waiting for it to be earned. He crouched again, this time not out of necessity but something closer to surrender. "How?" he whispered. "How is this even possible?" The man, his father, said nothing. He closed his eyes and leaned into the warmth of the fleece blanket. "Mission complete," he murmured, as if to no one in particular. And in that moment, the room held its breath. Later, after paramedics arrived and escorted the old man to a private clinic under a false name, the bunker was cleared and sealed again. Michael stood alone in the kitchen, staring at the patch of floor Lucy had been sitting on that morning. The photo of the young soldier in the hallway remained untouched, slightly crooked now, as if reacting to the shift in truth. Lucy re-entered the room with bare feet and a mug of warm milk in her hands. She looked up at her father and said, "You saw him too, right?" He nodded slowly. "Yeah, Lou, I saw him." She stepped closer, eyes searching his face. "So, he's really my grandpa?" Michael hesitated, then crouched to meet her at eye level. "I don't know what he is yet, but he's not nothing." Lucy nodded like that answer made perfect sense. Then she looked past him toward the hallway and whispered, "He didn't have a place to go, but now he does." And with that, she placed the mug on the floor beside the photo and sat again, cross-legged, exactly where she'd been that morning, waiting, listening. And for the first time in a long time, there was no sound beneath the floor, only the quiet assurance that someone had come home. The news spread through the coast like fog, slowly at first, then thick enough to touch. By mid-morning, every cafe from Kennebunkport to Wells was whispering the same impossible sentence: "Arthur Hart is alive." For most, it was just gossip. For Michael, it was a crisis. His publicist called before sunrise, her voice already in damage control mode. "We can't have this turning into a circus, Michael. We need a statement, preferably today." "But how do you write a press release about your dead father crawling out of the ground after 54 years? By 9, there were vans parked by the main gate, lenses glinting, voices rising whenever a shadow moved behind the glass walls. Inside, Michael kept the blinds drawn and the phone glued to his ear. Lawyers, PR teams, and board members asking what the plan was. The truth was, there was no plan. His company, North Lane Systems, was in the middle of a multi-billion-dollar merger. He couldn't afford a ghost in the basement. Still, between one call and the next, he caught himself replaying that moment in the bunker. His father's shaking hands, the soft mission complete, the look on Lucy's face when she'd said, "He's cold down there." And every time he tried to push the memory away, it came back with the same quiet insistence as those footsteps under the floor. Dana arrived around noon, still in her school clothes, hair windblown from the drive. She didn't ask permission. She walked straight in. "Is it true?" she asked. Michael didn't look up from his laptop. "Depends what you've heard." She folded her arms. "That your father, the war hero, the ghost of Langford Cove, is alive and living in your guest room." Michael closed the computer slowly. "Temporarily," he said. "He's under observation." "Observation?" Dana's tone sharpened. "He's a 74-year-old man, not a lab rat." Michael exhaled through his nose. "He's also a stranger who broke into my house." She stared at him, unimpressed. "Your house," she said pointedly. "That sits on the land he probably built with his own hands before you covered it in fiber optics and glass." He didn't answer. Silence fell heavy between them until Lucy's small voice broke it from the hallway. "He's awake," she said simply, "and he asked for hot chocolate." Dana's expression softened. "You see," she said, "he's not a story for the press, Michael. He's a man who's cold." Michael ran a hand over his face, somewhere between exhaustion and disbelief. "He doesn't even recognize me." Dana's reply was soft but sharp. "Then maybe he's not the only one who doesn't." Lucy dragged a small stool into the guest room that evening, her hair still damp from her bath. The room smelled faintly of antiseptic and laundry detergent. Art was sitting on the edge of the bed, wearing a clean shirt that looked too new for him, too white. His eyes darted around the room, mapping exits, corners, patterns in the curtains, habits that had long outlived the war. Lucy climbed onto her stool and set 2 mugs on the nightstand, one for him, one for herself. "I don't like drinking alone," she explained. Art's mouth twitched, almost a smile, almost a... He touched the rim of his mug, felt the warmth, then looked at her. "You live here?" he asked, voice scratchy. "I do. You too now." He nodded once, as if accepting temporary quarters in an unfamiliar camp. "What's your name again?" "Lucy. You can call me Lou if you want." He repeated it under his breath, testing the sound. "Lou," he said, short, like code. She giggled. "You can call me that when you forget the long one." He took a slow sip, flinched at the sweetness and said, "Sugar wasn't rationed like this before." Lucy tilted her head. "Rationed?" He nodded, eyes distant. "Different world, fewer choices." She thought for a moment, then said, "Maybe. But you can still choose to stay." He didn't answer, but his fingers tightened slightly around the mug. In the kitchen, Michael watched the live feed from the security camera. He told himself it was precaution, not curiosity. Yet he couldn't look away from the image of Lucy talking to the man who had left him with nothing but folded flags and annual Veterans Day speeches. When the nurse Marta had called himself again, Michael wasn't sure what that meant. Himself. Who was that exactly? The man in the photographs grinning in uniform beside a helicopter? Or the one now sitting quietly with his granddaughter, not remembering a single Christmas or birthday? The PR firm had drafted a statement. Neutral, polished, safe. The Hart family asks for privacy as they navigate this deeply personal matter. Michael had rewritten the word family 3 times, each time hesitating before deleting it again. He could manage mergers, data leaks, lawsuits. But this was the kind of unpredictability he'd built his empire to avoid. He closed the laptop and stared at the reflection of himself in the dark screen. A man who'd made billions engineering connection, but who couldn't cross the 10 feet between his own kitchen and the guest room. Art didn't remember his son's face, but he remembered habits, posture, tension, the way soldiers clenched their fists when holding back something they couldn't say. When Michael finally entered the room, Art straightened automatically, reflexive discipline still hardwired. "At ease," Michael muttered, the irony bitter in his mouth. Art blinked. "Do I know you?" Michael hesitated. "You used to." Art's brows furrowed, eyes scanning, searching for something familiar. "You were a kid," he said slowly, as if testing the theory aloud. "Used to climb the fence by the shed." Michael's heart stuttered. "Yeah, that was me." Art nodded, though uncertainty lingered. "Your mother, Evelyn, did she ever—" His voice trailed off, lost in fog. Michael swallowed hard. "She waited for you," he said. "She died waiting." The old man stared down at his hands. "War takes things," he said. "Names, years, faces, and people," Michael replied quietly. Art nodded again. "And people." Lucy, from her stool, interrupted gently. "You're both here now. That's something." They looked at her, the child who didn't know what years of silence could do, and for a moment neither man could argue with her logic. The word hero had begun appearing in headlines again, the kind that made Michael's stomach twist. Local hero found alive. The ghost of Langford returns. Every morning, his assistant filtered dozens of emails asking for interviews, documentaries, memorial footage. He deleted them all. Art didn't talk about heroism, and when the word reached his ears, he flinched like it was a gunshot. To Lucy, he wasn't a soldier or a ghost. He was the man who forgot sugar was no longer rationed, the one who asked if she'd done her homework, even though he couldn't remember what day it was. One evening she asked, "Were you scared?" He thought for a long time. "Every day," he said, "but not like you think." "Then why go?" she asked. "Because somebody had to." "And now?" she pressed. "Now," he murmured, "somebody has to stay." That night, when Lucy left 2 mugs again, one for her, one for him, he smiled faintly at the sight. For the first time since stepping out of the bunker, Art didn't feel like a ghost. And for the first time in his life, Michael realized that the only thing harder than being forgotten was trying to remember what love was supposed to sound like. The American Legion Hall still smelled faintly of old uniforms, weak coffee and polished wood, but Lucy wasn't bothered by any of that. She walked in carrying a plastic grocery bag with the checkers board inside, its cardboard box so worn the corners were held together with tape. Sergeant Bill McRae was already waiting near the back, sleeves rolled to the elbow, carefully arranging the pieces like they were medals. Art stood just inside the threshold, his body tense, uncertain. The room wasn't foreign to him. It had the same texture as his thoughts, patchy, half familiar, full of things that might have once mattered. McRae didn't rush him. "You remember this?" he asked. Art didn't respond. His gaze roamed from the dusty flags on the walls to the table in front of him. Lucy stepped forward, pulled out the board, and gently set it on the table. "It's okay if you don't remember the rules," she said, climbing onto a chair. "I mess up all the time. Grandpa Henry used to let me redo moves." Art blinked at the term, Grandpa. He hadn't earned that title in any traditional way, but he didn't correct her. Instead, he sat slowly, the bones in his knees protesting, and let his hand hover over the black pieces like muscle memory still had something to teach. Art didn't speak for a while after sitting down, and that silence might have made another child uncomfortable. But Lucy wasn't most children. She didn't fill the space with questions or fidgeting. She waited, watching him the way someone watches a slow, burning fire, not demanding heat, just grateful for the light. McRae sat nearby, sipping lukewarm coffee, not interrupting. Eventually, Art's fingers twitched. Then, without looking up, he moved a piece forward with surprising certainty. "You always open on the edge?" he asked. Lucy's eyes lit up and she nodded. "I like to keep the middle for later," she said, nudging one of her red checkers into play. The board between them became more than a game. It was a map neither of them needed to explain. They didn't talk about Saigon or folded flags or the way Michael watched from the back of the room with arms crossed like a man protecting something he wasn't sure he even wanted anymore. Art didn't ask where he was or why this girl had brought him here. He just moved pieces. And Lucy played back with a calm joy that had nothing to do with winning. They each took a few, lost a few. But for once, neither side was keeping score. Michael hadn't planned to stay. He told himself he was only there to drive them back, that it wasn't safe to let Lucy spend too long with a man who might mistake her for someone else. But the moment he saw Art's hand steady over the board, something knotted in his chest. He watched his daughter, open and fearless, in a way he'd forgotten how to be. Every few minutes, she'd glance toward him with a grin that didn't ask for approval, just silently said, "You could sit too if you wanted." He didn't. Not yet, because watching them felt safer than being part of it. Art hadn't once looked his way. Michael couldn't tell if it was intentional or just absence, a void in the mind where a son used to live. Either way, it stung. Somewhere between watching his father play a children's game and listening to Lucy's laughter echo through the hall, Michael felt that familiar cocktail of envy and grief, the bitter kind, brewed over decades. Because Art, broken as he was, had found a way to connect with Lucy that Michael, in all his precision and provision, never quite could, and that hurt more than he expected. Lucy started humming halfway through the game. It was a habit she had when she was thinking hard, an off-key melody that somehow calmed her. Art didn't seem to mind. In fact, when she crowned her first king, he let out a grunt that almost sounded like pride. "Well played, Lou," he muttered. She beamed. "You remembered my name." He nodded slowly, tapping his temple. "It's in there, just had to find it." She leaned closer, voice lowered. "Do you remember any stories from when you were little?" Art hesitated. "Not from when I was little," he said. "But there was a kid in my unit. Talked a lot, drew cartoons on letters he'd sent to his sister." Lucy tilted her head. "That wasn't you." He shook his head. "No, but I remember the drawings." She didn't press. Instead, she pushed her last piece across the board and said, "We don't have to talk about the before stuff. We can make new stuff." Art looked at her then, really looked, and for a moment the rigid soldier softened into something more human. He reached across the table, not to take a piece, but to place his hand gently over hers. They didn't finish the game. There were still 5 pieces on the board when Lucy stood, stretched, and said, "Let's save the rest for next time. That way, there has to be a next time." Art grunted his agreement. He didn't know what he was saving anymore, but he knew he didn't want it to end just yet. Michael stepped forward then, unsure of what to say or do. McCrae gave him a glance that said, "It's not about you right now," and returned to stacking the unused pieces back into the box. Lucy picked up the board, careful not to knock over the remaining checkers. "No one moves these till we come back, okay?" she said. Art nodded like he'd been given orders. Michael opened the car door for her, watching as she hopped in with the tired contentment only children and the very old knew how to carry. Art followed more slowly, but with less hesitation than before. And as they pulled away from the Legion Hall, Michael kept glancing at the rearview mirror. The board sat on the table, frozen in time, 5 pieces left, 1 handprint on the wood. Neither victory nor defeat, just a truce, still warm. What struck Michael most as they drove back home was how natural it had looked. His daughter and his father, 2 people who shouldn't know each other, acting like they'd always belonged on opposite sides of that board. He tried to imagine what it would have been like to sit there, to pick up a black checker and ask about things that had gone unsaid for 50 years, but the words felt clumsy in his throat. He hadn't grown up with games or second chances, only facts, funeral programs and polite nods at folded flags. Still, something had shifted. The checkerboard was no longer a child's toy. It was a language, one Michael hadn't learned, but maybe could. Not all at once, maybe not even soon, but the game was paused, not finished. And somewhere between those 5 forgotten pieces, something had been left waiting, not to be won, but to be returned to. Maybe that's how some wounds healed, not by being closed, but by staying open just long enough for someone to sit down across from you and say, "Your move." Michael didn't usually linger in the kitchen after sunrise. Most mornings, his time was broken into tight, silent segments: email, espresso, markets, silence. But today, he lingered by the counter, watching his father across the glass table. Art sat quietly, 2 hands wrapped around a ceramic mug he hadn't sipped from. Michael wasn't sure what he was expecting, maybe a spontaneous breakthrough, a flash of recognition, or even an argument. Instead, Art just stared at the steam curling from the mug like it held something worth decoding. "She waited for you," Michael said finally, keeping his tone flat, careful. "Mom, for years. She kept your uniform hanging by the door, even when it stopped smelling like anything." Art didn't look up. Michael shifted, folding his arms. "She told me you were a hero, that you died brave. I gave eulogies. I learned how to shake hands and say thank you for your service by the time I was 7. Still nothing, just a blink maybe." Michael exhaled sharply. "She worked 3 jobs, never remarried, never dated, said she couldn't. Said no one else would understand the sound of boots on hardwood." This time, Art flinched, barely, but enough for Michael to pause. "She wrote letters to the VA until her hands didn't work anymore," Michael continued, his voice lower now. "Asking if maybe you were a POW, if maybe the tags were wrong. She used to call the phone company to ask if someone had dialed her number from overseas. He tried to laugh, but it came out wrong. They stopped answering her calls." Art still wouldn't meet his eyes, but Michael wasn't done. "I built everything I have from that absence. I filled the hole with numbers, revenue, acquisition, headlines. You were the ghost I was supposed to live up to." His throat tightened, and he caught himself too late. "But the truth is, I hated you, not because you died, because you didn't." The words hovered like a confession neither of them had asked for. Finally, Art's voice came, dry, sanded down by too many years unsaid. "Nobody comes back the same," he murmured. Sometimes the man who makes it home is just what's left of the one who left." Michael clenched his jaw. "Then why bother coming back at all?" Art looked up for the first time, his eyes unreadable. "Because somebody here still remembers your name." Michael didn't answer right away. He pulled out a chair, sat across from him, and stared at the table. "Do you remember mine?" he asked, quieter than before. "Not the one on your dog tags, the one you used to say when you picked me up, when I'd fall and scrape my knees. Or when Mom would yell and I'd hide in the closet." Art blinked again, face unmoving. Michael leaned forward. "What did you used to call me?" Silence stretched too long. The distance between them didn't feel like feet anymore. It felt like decades. Art opened his mouth, closed it. Then slowly he reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a napkin, one of the cloth ones from the drawer Marta always folded too precisely. He laid it on the table, smoothed it, and picked up a pen left by Lucy, likely from one of her crossword obsessions. With careful, shaking strokes, he began to write. M-I-K-E. He underlined it once, then set the pen down. Michael stared at the letters, unmoving. "Mike," he repeated, his voice cracked. "You used to call me Mike." Art didn't say whether he remembered or whether the letters had come from memory or guessing, but something about the act, about the deliberate writing, the pause, the underline, held weight. Art's eyes shimmered and he looked down again, ashamed, or maybe overwhelmed. His hands curled into the napkin like he wanted to fold it and put it somewhere safe. "She was the best person I ever knew," he said finally. "Your mother. She deserved more." Michael nodded slowly. "She did." They sat in that moment, surrounded by the hum of appliances and the muffled sound of Lucy laughing with Marta in another room. Neither tried to fix anything. No one mentioned therapy or closure. They didn't talk about forgiveness. They just sat, two men who had spent a lifetime orbiting the same absence, finally sharing it. Michael reached across the table, not for a handshake, not for a hug, just to place his hand over the napkin. "You don't have to remember everything," he said. "But don't forget this." Art looked at him with something like relief, something softer than gratitude, and nodded. "I don't know if I came back the way she wanted me to," Art said after a while. "I don't even know if I came back at all." Michael tilted his head. "You're here," he said. "That has to count for something." Art stared at the four letters again, M-I-K-E, as if trying to keep them in place. "It's strange," he murmured. "I remember radio frequencies, latitudes, and how many bullets were left in my last clip. But your birthday? The name of the street we lived on? All gone." Michael shrugged. "I forget Lucy's shoe size half the time. Doesn't mean I love her less." A pause. "And then she calls you Grandpa, you know." Art gave the tiniest smile. "She's more forgiving than I deserve." Michael nodded. "She's 7. She doesn't know how to hate yet." They both chuckled lightly, just once. Then silence returned, but it wasn't cold or stiff. It was patient. Art picked up the napkin again and folded it into a tight square, sliding it into his pocket like a keepsake. "I'll try to remember more tomorrow," he said. Michael replied, "Try to stay, too." In the end, nothing more was said. The light through the kitchen windows grew a little brighter, but neither man noticed. The napkin stayed in Art's pocket, soft and worn. Michael stood and poured them both coffee, no longer because it was routine, but because it felt like something normal people did when the world didn't quite make sense. Art took his cup with both hands, the way he had earlier. This time, he drank. "Still too bitter," he muttered. Michael smirked. "Some things never change." Art nodded. "Some things shouldn't." They sat again, quiet, but no longer distant, and for the first time since the man from the bunker had entered their lives, Michael didn't feel like he was speaking to a stranger. He didn't know if the name on that napkin was memory or mercy, but maybe it didn't matter. Sometimes pretending to remember was just another way of trying to love, and that, Michael thought, might be enough. The power cut came without warning. One moment Lucy was reading on the couch, and Art was watching her from his armchair, half lost in a memory about a soldier who used to draw on ration boxes. The next, the room blinked into darkness, sudden and total. Somewhere outside, the sea was louder, angrier, like it had felt the shift and responded. Art stood too quickly, his breathing already uneven, and for a second, Lucy thought he might just sit back down. But he didn't. He started walking, not toward the kitchen or the stairs, but toward the side hallway that led to the basement. "Grandpa?" Lucy called, closing her book. He didn't answer. She followed, not running, just enough to match his steps. "Where are you going?" she asked. His reply was quiet, almost apologetic. "I need to get back. It's safer underground." That made her stop. Her chest tightened. She hadn't heard that tone before. Not fear exactly, but something older than fear. She reached out and took his hand. His skin was dry, his fingers stiff. "You don't have to go there," she said. "It's dark." Art nodded faintly. "Exactly." That's when she held tighter and said the words as simply as she could. "If the light goes out, we wait together." It was more than comfort. It was a contract. Art stopped walking. His shoulders twitched like a soldier mid-command who had just remembered he was off duty. He looked down at their joined hands, then past Lucy's face, searching for something in the darkness. Orders, perhaps, or clarity. But there was none. Just the absence of noise, of certainty. "They used to black out whole towns," he said after a long silence. "We'd wait for it to pass in silence like good ghosts." Lucy tilted her head. "You're not a ghost," she said. "You're my grandpa, and you're not going anywhere." Art laughed, just once, rough and uncertain. "You're bossy." "Only when I have to be," she replied, proud. Behind them, Michael had come into the hallway, watching the two figures outlined in the faint emergency light. He didn't interrupt. Something in the way Lucy's hand held his father's made him feel like an outsider in his own house, not excluded, just unpracticed. He had seen 100 men break down under pressure, boardroom titans, CEOs under indictment, billionaires in crisis. But he had never seen his daughter hold someone together so simply. And not because she was trying to fix him, but because she believed he didn't need to be. When the lights flickered back to life a few minutes later, Lucy didn't even react. She still had Art's hand in hers and was humming something low, some half-forgotten tune that may have been from a cartoon or a lullaby. Art looked around as if surprised to still be above ground. His breathing had slowed. The lines in his forehead weren't gone, but they weren't pulling so hard anymore. He looked at Michael, standing at a distance, and said, "She doesn't let you run, huh?" Michael gave a half-smile. "No, she never has." Art nodded, as if that made sense. Then he squeezed Lucy's hand once and said, "Thank you for waiting." "You didn't have to thank me," she replied. "That's what people do when they care about each other." He looked like he wanted to say more, but whatever it was, he left it unsaid. Later that evening after dinner, they sat in the den, Art, Lucy, and Michael. No television, no devices, just the kind of quiet that people didn't usually notice until they missed it. Lucy curled up beside her grandfather, her head on his arm, like it was the most natural thing in the world. Michael waited until Lucy had fallen asleep before shifting in his seat. Art stayed still, as if afraid to disturb the moment. "I want to ask you something," Michael said quietly. Art looked at him, tired but present. "Ask." Michael hesitated. Then, "What was your team?" Art blinked. "Bravo Company." "Ninth Infantry." Michael nodded. "And your baseball team?" A ghost of a grin crossed Art's face. "Red Sox, even when they lost." Michael chuckled, surprised by how quickly the answer had come. "Favorite food?" "Mac and cheese from the box. The powdered kind. My wife hated it." Michael smiled. "She always made it for me." "I know," Art said. "I just didn't remember how to say that until now." Michael swallowed hard. He tried to think of something else, something small, something safe. "Did you ever watch war movies?" "Only one that didn't make me angry," Art said. 12 O'Clock High. Gregory Peck, Quiet Courage. They sat in silence again. Then Art asked, "Do you really want to know these things?" Michael nodded, his voice low. "I do, even if it takes all year to remember them." Art's reply was simple. "Then we take all year." The house stayed quiet that night, but not in an empty way. It was the kind of quiet that comes after a storm, not because everything's fixed, but because the worst of the chaos has passed. Michael found himself replaying Lucy's words. "If the light goes out, we wait together." It echoed in his mind, softer each time, but no less powerful. He had spent so much of his life building things that didn't require patience. Fast systems, fast answers, fast solutions. But maybe healing didn't work that way. Maybe healing sounded like a little girl telling a broken man that darkness wasn't a place to flee to, but something you could face as long as you weren't alone. He looked at his daughter, now asleep with her hand still resting on Art's forearm, and thought about all the times he had walked away from discomfort simply because he didn't know what to say. Maybe this was what showing up looked like. Not speeches, not ceremonies, just staying, waiting, listening, sharing a room, and letting the silence be something safe instead of something sharp. It wasn't heroic, but maybe that was the point. Later, when Michael stood to turn off the last of the lights, Art looked up and said, "You still want to know more?" The question wasn't casual, it was an offering. Michael nodded. "I do," he said again. "Even if it takes time." Art exhaled slowly, then looked at Lucy. "She reminds me of someone," he murmured. "My sister, maybe, or someone I knew." Michael didn't correct him. He just nodded, letting the memory be what it was. Real or imagined, it didn't matter. What mattered was that Art had chosen to stay above ground, chosen to sit, to speak, to be known. As he turned off the light, Michael caught one last glance at his daughter, her head against the man she had pulled from the bunker with nothing but belief. The power might have gone out that afternoon, but something else had turned on and stayed. Somewhere between Lucy's hand and Art's heart, a fragile bridge had formed, one made not of blood or duty, but of presence, of showing up, of waiting together. And in that darkness they hadn't been lost. They had found something. Art didn't explain the knots at first. He simply laid out the frayed lengths of string on the kitchen table and began looping them slowly, letting Lucy watch in silence. She studied his fingers, the way they worked with calm precision, and didn't interrupt until the third knot. "What's that one called?" she asked. "Square knot," he replied. "Used to tie bandages in the field. Hold steady if you pull from both sides." Lucy looked at it closely, then picked up her own string and tried to copy the motion. Hers was lopsided, but the loop held. Art grunted with approval. "Better than most recruits," she beamed. "Show me another." He nodded and started again. Over the course of that afternoon, he taught her the bowline, the clove hitch, and a version of the double fisherman's knot he swore had saved a man's life once in 1969. When she asked why he remembered all these things, even when he forgot other stuff, like what day it was or which cupboard held the cereal, he said simply, "Knots are just shapes of memory. They stay in the hands longer than they stay in the mind." Lucy didn't pretend to fully understand. She just made another loop and whispered, "Then let's tie more." While Lucy and Art knotted string in the mornings, Michael was quietly trying to unknot his own habits. It started with the school drop-offs. At first, they were awkward, Michael tapping the steering wheel while Lucy talked about things he didn't know how to respond to. Spelling tests, a friend named Clara, a playground rivalry over trading cards. But he started listening, not just nodding. Then he began waiting in the car after she walked through the doors, just in case she forgot her lunch again. She never did, but it became part of the routine. In the afternoons, he started joining Art at the American Legion. No agenda, no cameras, just sitting in the back while Art played checkers or talked about old buddies he half remembered. One Thursday, Michael brought 2 cups of coffee. Art took his without a word. After a few sips, he muttered, "You finally figured out I take it black." Michael smiled faintly. "Took me a while." It wasn't much, but it was something. In between meetings and stock updates, Michael found himself checking the house calendar more than the market, Lucy's parent-teacher conference, Art's VA appointment, small things that had never fit into his spreadsheet life, things that didn't yield profit but gave something else back. One afternoon, while looking for an old invoice folder, Michael opened a drawer in the guest room and found a notebook, small, spiral-bound, creased from being carried around too often. Inside, the handwriting was shaky, but deliberate. The first page read, A for Art, L for Lucy, M for Michael. Below that, Art had written short notes. Some were factual. Lucy likes strawberry jam. Michael doesn't eat breakfast. Others were more abstract. Lucy hums when she's happy. Michael leaves rooms too fast. Michael flipped through the pages, each line like a breadcrumb. Remember Lucy's favorite knot, bowline. Don't forget the thing about the sugar. Ask about school picture. The last page was mostly blank, except for a single sentence. They're still here. Michael sat on the edge of the bed, the notebook in his hands, and let himself feel something he'd avoided for years. That maybe presence didn't need to be perfect to matter. Maybe effort, clumsy as it was, could build trust. Later that night, he didn't mention the notebook to Art. But when he poured his father a cup of coffee, he didn't ask how he wanted it. He just poured it black. Art noticed. He didn't say anything either, but he drank the whole cup. Marta, always the quiet observer, noticed the changes first. Not just the new routines, but the absences, the way tension had slowly begun to leak out of the walls. No more clipped conversations, no more slammed doors. Michael no longer barked orders into phone calls from the kitchen while Lucy ate alone. Instead, there were shared breakfasts, if not long ones. There were mismatched mugs left in the sink, one with coffee, one with cocoa. She caught Art humming under his breath while folding laundry, a song she didn't recognize but somehow felt old. And when Lucy had trouble tying her shoelaces one morning, Michael didn't call Marta for help. He crouched beside her and retied them himself, then taught her to do it again. "Like Grandpa showed you," he said. Marta smiled to herself and said nothing, but she wiped her eyes later when no one was looking. The house had always been large, pristine, efficient, but now it was becoming lived in. Not messy exactly, but layered, like a home made of people who were trying. And for the first time in years, she didn't dread the echo of her own footsteps through the halls. She could hear laughter, low voices, music that wasn't background noise. Dana, too, began to notice a difference, not just in Lucy, but in Michael. Lucy no longer came home from weekends with just souvenirs or new toys. She came home with stories. "Grandpa taught me the rope knot that holds boats," she'd say, holding up a mess of string with pride. Or Daddy asked me what book I'm reading and didn't even look at his phone. Dana had grown used to raising Lucy mostly on her own. Michael had been present in the way wealth allowed. Reliable pickups, tuition paid on time, the best school, the best healthcare. But presence and participation were not the same. Now she saw something shift. Michael spoke less like a CEO managing a crisis and more like a man learning how to be in a room without controlling it. One evening, when she dropped Lucy off, she lingered a little longer in the doorway. She watched as Lucy tied a makeshift knot around Art's wrist and declared, "It means you can't disappear." Michael was the one who whispered, "She's serious about that stuff." Dana met his eyes. "Yeah," she said, "and she's teaching you both how to stay." Then she smiled, soft and real, and left. The knots remained, on doorknobs, around Lucy's backpack straps on the banister, each one a little ritual, a quiet signal. Lucy said they were reminders of promises, of people, of the idea that nothing important should be left loose for too long. Art continued teaching new ones, even inventing a few. One was a promise knot, which Lucy said meant you'd show up again tomorrow. Michael never mastered that one, but Lucy didn't mind. "He tries," she told Art. "That's part of the promise." And Art believed her. One night, after Lucy fell asleep with a ball of yarn tangled around her fingers, Michael stood in the doorway of her room, watching her breathe. Art joined him without speaking. They stood together for a long while. Then Michael said, "You think she's okay?" Art nodded. "She's more than okay. She's holding us all together." Michael chuckled. "With string," Art smiled, "with presence." Downstairs, the small spiral notebook sat open on the table. A new page had been added, just 3 letters in Art's handwriting. "We're learning." The knots on the walls weren't decorations. They were maps. They marked where something had come undone and where something else was finally being tied back together. Art hadn't wanted to come to the Veterans Day parade. He hadn't said it out loud, but Michael could tell. It was in the way he buttoned his shirt too slowly, the way his hand lingered on the doorknob like he was waiting for permission to turn it. But Lucy had insisted, "Just for a little while, Grandpa. You can leave whenever you want." So he'd come, letting her lead him by the hand like he was the child and not the other way around. The parade had already begun when they arrived, brass bands echoing down the narrow street, flags waving in synchronized rhythm. For a moment it was almost too much. Art's body tensed as the drums rolled by, each beat landing harder than the last. His breathing shallowed. Michael noticed it first, but Lucy moved faster. Without a word, she tugged gently on Art's hand and veered away from the crowd. Down a quiet side street, they found a stoop with 2 cracked steps, and Lucy sat first, pulling Art down beside her. "Better?" she asked. He nodded slowly, his jaw still tight. "The drums," he whispered. "It's not the sound, it's the echo." She didn't ask what he meant. She just reached into her jacket and unwrapped a brownie. Art took the brownie with both hands, like it might fall apart if he didn't hold it right. He didn't eat right away. He stared at it, blinking, until Lucy nudged him. "It's just chocolate, not a trick." That made him smile, faint but real. "I used to trade chocolate for extra rations," he said. "1 bar could get you coffee or a dry pair of socks." She tilted her head. "You think this brownie's worth coffee?" "Maybe even 2 cups," he said, taking a small bite. They ate in silence for a moment, the kind that didn't feel awkward. Then, unprompted, Art said, "Heroes make me nervous." Lucy glanced at him, confused. "Why?" He swallowed. "Because they're always the ones who didn't come back." She sat with that for a minute, chewing slowly. "But you came back." "Barely," he murmured. "Some days I still feel like I'm looking for the exit." Lucy put down her half of the brownie and turned to face him fully. "Can I call you Grandpa? Not just when I'm trying to convince you to do stuff, like always." Art looked at her, his mouth opening, closing, then settling into a soft smile. "You can," he said. "Always." Lucy leaned back on her hands, satisfied. Then she looked up at him and asked, "And what do you want to call me?" He blinked, caught off guard. "Lucy," he said. "That's your name." "No," she replied. "I mean, if you had to choose something special. A name that means something, like how I chose Grandpa." Art looked away for a second, brows furrowed, then back at her. "Why would you pick that name for me?" She shrugged. "Because it means someone who stays, even if they left before." His throat tightened. He cleared it, then looked at her again. "What name would you want?" She smiled. "Ponte," she said. "It means bridge in Portuguese. Marta taught me." He repeated it softly, as if trying it on. "Ponte." She nodded. "I want to be the thing that connects people who don't know how to talk to each other." Art chuckled, but it caught in his chest. "That's a lot for a kid." "It's easier than it sounds," she said. "You just have to sit still and listen." He looked at her like she was both 7 years old and impossibly older. "Then you're already doing it," he said. And he meant it. Back at the corner, Michael had been watching from a distance. He hadn't followed when they slipped away from the crowd. He'd given them space, told himself it was about trust. But the truth was murkier. He didn't know how to be part of whatever was happening between them. It looked simple, but it wasn't. It looked soft, but it was heavy with things he didn't have the language for. Seeing his daughter talk to the man who once left him behind, it stirred something. He thought of the foundation he was building in Art's name, the speeches being drafted, the partnerships lined up. All those grand gestures meant to stitch something back together. But now, watching Art and Lucy share a brownie on a cracked step, he realized the thing he was chasing had already begun in smaller ways, in unspoken choices, in names exchanged like gifts. Maybe family wasn't rebuilt in headlines or memorial plaques. Maybe it started here, on a back street with no cameras, just a girl and the man she called Grandpa before he earned it. For the first time, Michael didn't want to design the moment. He just wanted to sit down in it. Eventually, Lucy stood, brushing crumbs from her lap. "Want to go back?" she asked. Art looked at the street, at the sound of the distant band still playing, and for a second Michael thought he'd say no, that he'd shake his head and ask to go home, or worse, head toward the car alone. But Art surprised them both. "Let's finish the parade," he said. Lucy grinned and took his hand again. They didn't return to the front lines of the crowd. Instead, they walked slowly toward the edge, close enough to watch, but far enough to breathe. Art didn't flinch at the drums this time. He didn't smile either. He just stood beside Lucy, steady, present. Michael joined them after a few minutes, one step behind. They didn't talk. They didn't need to. The music played, the flags waved, and the man who had once lived in a hole beneath the house now stood in the open, choosing to remain. Art didn't have the words for what had shifted inside him, but he felt it. Something that used to pull him away now felt quiet. Lucy had given him something he didn't know he still wanted, a reason to stay. Not because he owed it, not because he was expected to, but because he was seen, understood, if only in fragments. At the end of the parade, as people began to scatter, Lucy looked up at him and said, "Thanks for not leaving." Art squeezed her hand. "Thanks for noticing." Michael watched them again, this time not from a distance. He stepped beside them. Not behind, not ahead. Just beside, and on that day, the man who once disappeared did not. He stayed, whole, in the only way he knew how. By the time autumn replaced winter, the house had learned to breathe differently. Art no longer walked the full length of the garden, but insisted on sitting near the back window for long stretches, watching Lucy in her routines and tracing things he didn't say with the edge of his thumb against the fabric of his pants. His body, once taut with instinct and memory, now softened with quietness. He had begun to take fewer steps, but his eyes took in more. He'd whisper things sometimes, fragments, code names, initials, and Lucy, always within earshot, would simply answer back with affirmations, never correcting him, never forcing context. "That's right," she'd nod, even if she had no idea who Wilkes or Charlie Company were. There was an unspoken rule forming between them. Some things didn't need explaining to be honored. Meanwhile, the world inside the house had become quieter, but not with absence. It was the quiet of things finding a rhythm. Michael worked from the kitchen now instead of the top-floor office. Dana stayed longer after drop-offs. Marta started cooking 2 extra portions automatically, and Art, in his fragility, remained the still center of it all, observing as life moved, finally, without retreat. Sometimes the stillness fractured. Art would wake in the middle of the night, disoriented, calling out names like they were orders barked into radio static. "Deacon, get your head down!" Or worse, pleading. Lucy had heard it once and crept to the door, but it was Michael who beat her there. He stood in the doorway, unsure whether to intervene. Art, drenched in sweat, eyes wide and lost, clutched the sides of the blanket like a foxhole. "Deacon," he called again, this time quieter. Michael crossed the room before he had time to talk himself out of it and sat down on the edge of the bed. "I'm here," he said gently, not knowing who Deacon was but understanding that someone had to show up. Art didn't look at him at first, just blinked hard like someone adjusting to light. Then slowly, his hand found Michael's forearm and stayed there, not squeezing, just holding. Michael stayed seated like that for almost half an hour, saying nothing else, offering nothing but presence. It didn't matter that he wasn't the man his father remembered. What mattered was the chair wasn't empty. And sometimes, when the mind breaks open in the dark, it isn't memory that heals, it's company. The next morning, Michael asked Dana quietly, "Did he ever talk about a deacon?" She shook her head, sipped her coffee, then said, "Might have been someone he lost, might have been someone who saved him, or maybe he's the one who didn't get to save him." Michael let the answer sit between them, feeling how complicated love was when tied to survival. He wanted to ask more, to investigate, to figure it out like a riddle with an answer at the end. But Lucy passed by then, dragging a tiny wooden chair with her, and said, "Vovo's gonna need this for lunch." She always called him that now. Vovo, not Grandpa, not Sir, not even Art. It was a name rooted in affection, not memory. And she said it like it had always belonged to him, like she'd never known anything else. That simplicity, that clarity, hit Michael in ways his mergers and press releases never did. He couldn't explain it in quarterly reports, but something about watching her say Vovo and mean it with her whole chest cracked open a small, steady part of him. It was something he'd missed, maybe his whole life, being allowed to mean something to someone without first having to earn it. One afternoon, Lucy took his dog tag, the one Art had clung to like a tether on that first day in the bunker, and hung it gently on a small brass nail by the doorframe. Michael noticed and asked what she was doing. "So he doesn't get lost," she said simply. "Now it knows where he lives." He wanted to correct her. The tag wasn't alive, but then stopped himself. Maybe it was. Maybe objects became more than metal and engraving when attached to decades of waiting. Art didn't comment when he saw it there. He looked at it for a long time, reached out once, let his fingers rest on the chain for a beat too long, then nodded to no one in particular and walked back to the kitchen. That night, after everyone had gone to bed, Michael stood in front of it too, looking not just at the name, but at what it represented. Someone who had been lost to time, to war, to memory itself, and yet somehow found again in the daily softness of being expected, wanted, named. The biggest shift came quietly. One morning, while Marta read the paper and Lucy played with string on the floor, Art sat at the table, a pen trembling in his hand. A half-crumpled napkin lay in front of him. He scribbled something, then crossed it out, tried again. Then slowly, with the care of someone tracing their way home through fog, he wrote in all capitals, "Arthur L. Hart, home. Not house, not bunker, not quarters. Home." Michael, who had just walked into the room, froze. He didn't say anything. He didn't want to ruin it by naming it too soon. He watched his father slide the napkin toward Lucy, who looked at it, beamed and whispered, "You remembered all of it." Art didn't answer, but his eyes welled up, and that was enough. They didn't frame the napkin or laminate it. It stayed on the fridge for a week before curling at the edges and falling behind the counter. That was okay too. It had done what it needed to. By the time fall settled in fully, the rhythm of the house had nothing to do with time zones or profit margins. It was built on check-ins and jokes half-finished, on Lucy narrating her homework and Art teaching her how to knot things in new ways. Dana started coming by in the evenings, not because she had to, but because it felt natural now. Marta began setting 4 places instead of 3 without being asked, and Michael finally understood what presence meant. Not being impressive, not being productive, just being. Being the voice that says, "I'm here," even when it isn't asked for. Being the warmth behind someone's panic. Being the one who waits, even when the memory doesn't return. The war that Art had carried inside him, unspoken, unfinished, didn't need to be fought anymore. Not here, not now. The day Lucy added another little brass nail beside the dog tag, she didn't say anything. She just tapped the wall gently, as if marking it for someone else. Michael noticed, and instead of asking what it was for, he smiled and said, "Good idea, because some people don't need medals. They need a place that remembers them, even when they forget themselves." It happened quietly, on a morning that should have been ordinary. The air was sharp, the kind that made you pull your sleeves down over your hands, and the sea outside carried a thin silver light. Lucy was the first to notice. She went into Art's room holding her notebook, planning to show him a new knot she'd invented. "Grandpa," she whispered, stepping closer. His eyes were closed, his face still, but not strained. She waited for the rise and fall of his chest, the familiar shallow rhythm. It didn't come. For a long moment she stood there, not afraid, just listening, as if silence could explain itself. Then she sat on the edge of the bed and placed her small hand over his, the way he'd done for her when storms scared her. She didn't run for Michael. She didn't scream. She just cried softly, like someone who already understood something adults spent lifetimes trying to deny. When Michael came in minutes later and saw her sitting there, head bowed, he didn't ask how she knew. He knew she always knew first. The house felt still, but not empty. The kind of stillness that comes after someone's spirit has learned how to take up a different kind of space. The funeral was small, Art would have wanted it that way. The service took place near the old Legion Hall, under the same flag that had once flown when he returned from a war no one believed he survived. McCrae, the old sergeant, stood at the podium, his voice steady but stripped of ceremony. "Arthur L. Hart," he said, "was a soldier who fought long after the war ended. The rest of us came home once. He came home twice." He paused, then stepped back. Michael sat in the front row beside Lucy, his hands gripping the folded flag that now felt heavier than metal. Marta dabbed at her eyes, and Dana held Lucy's shoulder. The service wasn't loud or long. There were no grand speeches, no salutes beyond the quiet one McCrae gave with 2 fingers against his brow. When the bugle started, its echo didn't sound mournful. It sounded final, like a promise kept. Art had once said that not everyone who dies leaves, and as the flag was folded into perfect triangles, Lucy whispered under her breath, "He didn't." When the time came to speak, Lucy insisted she wanted to read something. They tried to dissuade her. She was too young, they said, too small to stand before that many eyes, but she was resolute. Michael lifted her onto the wooden crate behind the pulpit so she could reach the microphone. Her voice didn't waver. "They told me my grandpa died before I was born," she began, "but I think he just took the long way here." The room was utterly silent. "He taught me how to make knots, not just with rope, with people. He said knots remember things your hands don't. So I tied one for him, and he stayed. I taught him how to wait for the light even when it went out. He said that was harder than fighting. He said light's supposed to find you, but sometimes you have to find it." She paused then, smiled slightly. "He used to call me Ponte, bridge, because I helped him cross back." When she finished, she stepped down slowly, and Michael felt something inside him loosen, the part that had always tried to build meaning out of money and achievement. Lucy had built it with love and a piece of string. After the crowd dispersed, Michael lingered beside the casket long after everyone else had gone. He held Art's dog tag in his palm, the metal cold, worn smooth where time had rubbed the edges. He remembered the first night he saw that same tag around a man's neck in the bunker, the disbelief, the anger, the confusion. And now, holding it again, there was none of that, only gratitude. He pressed it to his lips and closed his eyes. It didn't matter that they never got all the answers, that Art never remembered every name, or that Michael never said every apology out loud. What mattered was that they met again at all, that in the middle of all that noise and history, they had found a way back to one another. When he finally let go, he placed the tag gently atop the folded flag, not as a soldier's token, but as a father's keepsake. Dana came to stand beside him. "You okay?" she asked quietly. "Yeah," he said, his voice steady. "He made it home." She reached out, took his hand, and didn't let go. That night, after everyone had gone to bed, Michael went to close the back door and stopped halfway. The wind carried the sound of the sea, steady, endless, familiar. The waves were stronger than usual, slapping against the rocks in a rhythm that reminded him of the steps that used to echo from below the house months before. He froze, half expecting to feel that same chill of dread from the old days, but it never came. Instead, he smiled faintly. The footsteps under the floor no longer frightened him. They didn't belong to ghosts now. They belonged to memories, learning how to walk without pain. He looked over his shoulder toward Lucy's room, where a sliver of light still shone under the door. She was probably awake, sketching or tying one last knot before bed. He whispered, "Good night, Dad," not expecting an answer, but for the first time, not needing one. The sea kept moving. It always did, but it didn't sound lonely anymore. When morning came, the house was quiet in a new way, not hollow, just balanced. Lucy had hung Art's dog tag by the same nail near the door, its chain tangled with the others she'd used for her makeshift bridge. The tag swung gently when the wind came through, catching the first sunlight of the day. She touched it lightly and whispered, "Now you can always find your way." Michael watched her from the kitchen, coffee in hand. his chest heavy but calm. Marta hummed softly as she set the table, and Dana flipped pancakes while teasing Lucy about using too much syrup. The war had ended, not in a parade, not in a monument, but here, in a house that had finally learned to stay full. Michael didn't know if Art could see them, or hear them, or walk those invisible steps beneath the floor anymore. But he knew this. The man who'd once been lost in darkness had left something behind that didn't fade with him. A pattern, a rhythm, a light that didn't vanish but stayed, in knots, in bridges, in people who waited together. And for the first time, the house didn't echo. It glowed. We put a lot of heart into every story we tell here. It's not just about the past, it's about the moments that shape who we are. If this story moved you even a little, please consider subscribing to our channel. It helps us keep bringing you stories that matter, stories that stay. We'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments too. We read every one of them with care, and if this story touched you, maybe share it with someone who needs a little light today. Thank you for being here with us.